Hello, everyone. Once again, this is Pastor Terry Reese of the Valley Grace Brethren Church of Armagh, Pennsylvania, located just 10 miles north of Flood City, beautiful and historic Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And Armagh is located at the intersection of routes 56 and 22. And if you happen to be our way, we welcome you to attend one of our Sunday morning services. It's been a while since we posted an online video, but we're glad to be back, and we're excited about our new series. We have an introductory message this week, and this series is quite relevant, and a number of events all seem to have come together that have kind of inspired this series. We had been doing in our Sunday school, in our church, a series on church history, and this series has been quite profitable as it has allowed us to kind of deviate from the path and embark in various segues. Church history is, of course, pregnant with many theological controversies, and it allows us to, this church history series sort of provides kind of a launching pad for us to be able to get into a variety of issues. And we were talking about the medieval period of church history, and we were about to get into the era of the Reformation and its causes when in April and May, various important events occurred in Rome. Of course, I'm referring to the death of Pope Francis and the election of his successor, the first American Pope, Leo XIV. Now, we had been discussing the history of the papacy in our Sunday school when Francis died, so it all seemed to be rather timely. And that's what really is at the nucleus of why we're doing this series. Right now, the eyes of the whole world are upon Rome, and this is indeed a very crucial topic. We're looking at various issues related to Roman Catholicism, various theological controversies associated with Roman Catholicism, and we're looking at Rome's evidences in terms of its claims. We begin this series with a quote from Joseph Stalin. Yes, Joseph Stalin, the late unlamented Soviet dictator, one of the most terrifying personalities in human history, one of the greatest mass murderers in human history, and a man who was absorbed with the whole issue of power and how to retain power. And he and his cronies were discussing the Church of Rome and the potentiality that the Church of Rome might be offended by some of the things that the Soviet government was doing. And Stalin was rather dismissive of Roman Catholic influence, and he offered this famous quote, and how many divisions does the Pope have? Unquote. How many divisions does the Pope have? Stalin's point was the Pope commands no armies, and as far as Stalin was concerned, the measure of power and influence is based purely upon military strength. That seems to be his point. Well, in response to Stalin or anybody else that thinks like him, who is dismissive of the influence of Roman Catholicism and the papacy, I would begin by posing this question. What other organization on planet Earth right now has the international scope of the Church of Rome? I mean, here you have a worldwide organization that is uniquely transnational, transcultural. 1.4 billion people on planet Earth, that's close to 1/5 of Earth's population, close 20%, are Roman Catholics. And there is a Roman Catholic Church in virtually every country in the world, embracing just about every culture and language. Now, there are exceptions. Saudi Arabia, a very strict theocratic state under the dominion of the Wahhabi movement, which is a very conservative Islamic movement, does not allow the Roman Catholic Church to formally exist as a church within their country. But nonetheless, there are Catholics in Saudi Arabia, foreign workers that are there. And, it is quite breathtaking, the breadth of the influence of the Catholic Church. According to Vatican News, the Roman Catholic population increased globally by 1.15% between 2022 and 23. And a lot of that growth is in Africa and Asia. Africa has 20% of the world's Roman Catholics. Asia has 11% of the world's Roman Catholics. Of course, this is that famous north-south division. The southern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, you see marked growth in various Christian sects and denominations. But this is all reflected, this growth in the third world, in the makeup of the College of Cardinals. You might have seen, as they were talking about this conclave that would elect a new pope, that it was more international in its scope than any previous conclave. You even had a cardinal from Mongolia. We usually don't think of Mongolia as a Catholic nation, but nonetheless, there is a Catholic Church here. They have their own cardinal, and it's just reflective of the expansion of this vast international movement. And in the Americas, you have 48% of world Catholics, almost half. South America alone has about 28% of the Catholic Church's membership. Central America, about 14%. And North America, about 6.6%. Europe, of course, is the most demographically stagnant area. Just population-wise, Europe is not really growing, except for Islamic immigrants. But nonetheless, 20% of the world's Catholics live in Europe, and 40% of Europeans are at least nominally Roman Catholic. Of course, Europe is a very spiritually sterile area, but nonetheless, the Church of Rome is the most prominent church in Europe. United States, 20% of Americans, about 1/5 of our American population is Roman Catholic. So, when you think about all these population statistics that I laid before you, I think we can right away offer this response to Uncle Joe, Mr. Stalin, that the Pope has far more divisions in a certain respect and commands far greater loyalty than world communism ever did, even in its Cold War heyday. Again, you're talking about pushing about 1/5 of the world's population, 1.4 billion people. So what we're saying is, excuse me, what we're saying is, in terms of the relevance of our series, what happens in Rome matters. And let's not think that it doesn't. That's why one of the reasons we're doing this series. Our vice president, J.D. Vance, who is a Catholic convert, we'll talk about that in a little while. He offered this perspective, quote, "We have an American Pope of the world's largest single religion. A guy who doesn't have an army, but who I think has an incredible amount of capacity to convene and to influence not just Europe, but really the entire world," unquote. There's a very good response to Joseph Stalin's dismissive attitude to the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. In terms of world Christianity, nominal Christianity, of course, not everybody who claims to be a Christian really is a Christian in the biblical sense, but in terms of nominal Christianity, name-only Christianity, over 50% of nominal Christians, those who name themselves Christians, are Roman Catholic. And these numbers dwarf all other bodies. Whether you're talking about Eastern Orthodoxy, which is a religion of, I think I have the statistics here somewhere. The religion, Eastern Orthodoxy, is the faith of some 260 million people. Whether you're talking about Eastern Orthodoxy or you're talking about all the combined sects of Protestantism, or whether you're talking about various other groups that are only marginally Christian but consider themselves Christian, all these groups combined are dwarfed by the extent of the Roman Catholic Church. Again, over 50%, the solid majority of those who claim to be Christians identify with the Church of Rome. So that speaks in and of itself as to the influence of this movement. And that is why we are embarking on this series of messages. We cannot ignore this topic if we're going to have a YouTube or Facebook or Rumble ministry. These are the platforms we're on that really addresses the current theological issues that are before us and not address the whole issue of Roman Catholicism. We need to speak as to this organization that has such power and influence and which makes staggering claims. This church claims that it uniquely, underline that, uniquely represents the person and the message of Jesus Christ. And it calls itself the Catholic Church. The word Catholic means universal. It claims to be the one and only true apostolic church. It is the universal church. It is the church in its entirety. Other churches are not Catholic. Only the Roman Catholic Church is the universal church. And it claims that it commands a divine authority that other churches simply do not possess. Now, when the world thinks about Christianity, I'm talking about the entire world, when the world thinks of Christianity, it often thinks of Rome, just because of the extent and the influence of the Church of Rome. Christianity, in the minds of many, is synonymous, or Roman Catholicism, in the mind of many, is simply synonymous with Christianity. And, if you've been carefully watching the news media and its coverage these last couple months, April and May of 2025, it's very plain that the guardians of popular culture, the media, see the Church of Rome as uniquely historical. If you can't see me here, if you're listening to the audio version of this, I'm doing air quotes, legitimate, and it is the most profound expression of the authentic Christian faith. Other groups just do not have this aura of legitimacy attached to it. I represent a small, fundamental denomination of Anabaptist origins, the Conservative Grace Brethren Churches International. Very small group. And if you think about the larger Grace Brethren group, the Charis Fellowship, that too is a comparatively very, very, very small group. And, when the world looks at small groups such as this, whether they be conservative evangelical groups or neo-evangelical groups or fundamental groups, they're just lacking a certain legitimacy in the world's eyes. The Roman Catholic Church is the real deal when you're talking about Christianity. That seems to be the attitude that comes from the media, especially as you watch these events in Rome. And again, the timing of our message, our series of messages, has everything to do with the fact that the world's entire focus right now, here in May of 2025, is in Rome. The events, of course, as I said, to deal with the death of the controversial Pope Francis on April the 21st. Francis was a very prominent figure in terms of the history of the Roman Catholic Church, just due to the fact that he was such an unusual personality who really, shall we say, shook things up. One conservative commentator, I believe it was Hugh Hewitt, who's a Catholic, I think once referred to him in an interview with Ross Douthat, referred to Francis as the hippie pope. That's not me saying that, that's a Roman Catholic saying that. But Francis certainly certainly a very prominent personality, someone who caught your attention. And his death was big news, not just because of his controversial nature, but what he represented, the papacy. And of course, the world is all fascinated, intrigued by the fact that on May 8th, an American, the first American, was elected Pope, Robert Francis Prevost, who has taken the throne name of Leo XIV. Now, in a future session, we'll be talking about some of these events and what they might mean. Everybody right now is trying to speculate, what will the death of Pope Francis mean? How deep was his influence? He chose, I believe it was 80% of the cardinals that were able to vote in the last conclave. They were his appointees. And how much of an impact, lasting impact, did the, quote, hippie pope make in terms of the history of Catholicism? And what changes will come now that you have an American, Robert Francis Prevost, as the new pope? What will he do? Everybody seems to be prognosticating and speculating. What will this new man do? Is he left? Is he right? How progressive is he? How traditional is he? And everybody seems to be caught up in this guessing game. I think a lot of it will depend on his appointments. We'll have to wait and see what he has to do. Not that there aren't certain clues, but we'll address that in a future session. Excuse me. Just getting over a bout of bronchitis, so we crave your indulgence if we have to cough every once in a while. We'll try to hold it down. But it's evident that the popular press, as I said, both the left-wing press and the right-wing press, seem to cast an aura of legitimacy upon the Church of Rome that evangelical Protestantism does not enjoy. And the reason I say that is, as I was watching, and I've been watching very carefully the coverage of these events. It seems that the popular press, both left and right, have this tendency in covering this story of rather dutifully and uncritically enunciating Rome's claims without question, without challenge. I'm talking about you hear things like the 2,000-year-old Catholic Church. Okay, the idea is that the Catholic Church is the original church. Everyone else is the offshoot. Everyone else is kind of the split off. The Catholic Church is, well, that's the real thing that goes back to the apostles. You see the media like Fox News, which I usually watch because I can't stand the left-wing legacy media. Fox News talks about the 2,000-year-old institution of the papacy. They don't analyze that statement. They don't critique it. They simply repeat it as though it were unquestioned fact. Well, some of us do question these facts, so-called facts. The Pope was spoken of in commentary as the, quote, successor of St. Peter, the 267th Pope. Well, fine, that is the Roman Catholic understanding of these things. But some of us would not accede to these so-called facts as being legitimate. As we get into this series, you'll see that we take grave issue with the historicity and the theological accuracy of all of these claims. I do not think that the papacy is 2,000 years old. I don't think that the current Pope, Leo, is the successor of St. Peter. I don't think that St. Peter was actually a bishop of Rome. I don't think that Christ granted him papal authority. I don't see any New Testament evidence that the other disciples in Matthew 16, after Peter was declared the rock, I don't see any evidence that the other disciples pointed and said, "Do you see that? Jesus just made him the Pope." I see no evidence of that whatsoever, that there was any New Testament recognition of Peter as the Pope. I don't see any genuine historical evidence that there is any unbroken succession from Peter to the current popes of Rome. Even if Peter was the bishop of Rome, I don't see any basis for the idea that his so-called successors inherit his apostolic authority. And I don't see any basis for this fanciful list of this sort of tranquil list, orderly list of 266 successors. Fact is, Catholic history is much messier than that. filled with anti-popes. There were times when there were 3 popes at once, rival claimants. It gets very dark, and it gets very dirty, the history of the papacy. So, when the media is regurgitating all these claims of a 2,000-year-old church, that it is the original church, that that the papacy is 2,000 years old, that Peter was the first pope, and that there is an unbroken succession of successors of Peter, culminating in Leo the 14th. I would take issue with all of that, but that's we're getting ahead of ourselves. Those are some of the things that we're going to be discussing in this series. But I'm just underlining here that there is a media, I don't know if the term bias is correct or not, but certainly there is a popular media perception that all these things are true and historical. Now, this perspective of the media, at least in my perception, seems to apply no matter what sort of media you're looking at. Whether you're looking at the pinheads of the mainstream legacy media, the progressive media, the traditional CNN and the traditional networks like ABC, CBS, NBC, whether you're talking about the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Associated Press, these are the left-wing pinheads, the mainstream legacy media. They share in this perspective, but then again, so does the conservative media. Fox News seems to regurgitate that, and it's interesting. So many of our and I enjoy Fox News. I like the people that are on Fox News, good conservative people, most of them. But it is interesting. Many of our friends on Fox News are Roman Catholics, and they sound like Roman Catholics when they cover these stories. And even the non-traditional media that I like to watch, I'm talking about the podcasts. And that's, by the way, one of the delightful things about the expanded media today. You're not locked into the traditional ABC, NBC kind of a thing. You do have these wider choices today. Of course, the left, that's what is trying to shut down freedom of speech. But it's delightful that we do have all these popular podcasts out there. But so many of these regurgitate this kind of attitude towards Roman Catholicism. And many of our popular conservative, populist, nationalist commentators, and we appreciate that point of view, are nonetheless Roman Catholics. Think about Matt Walsh, Megyn Kelly, Michael Knowles, Jack Posobiec of Human Events, Steve Bannon. I love to listen to Steve Bannon. Liz Wheeler. All of these are Catholics that I just enumerated, and many of them are trad calves, that is, traditional Catholics. So you do see that general perspective, no matter what sort of media you're listening to, mainstream, conservative, non-traditional media, the podcasters. You see, that's another reason why we're doing this series, because it's easy to be kind of brainwashed by the media when you get one point of view. But I think also, as you've been watching these events in Rome, you can see the church's vast international, cultural, political, religious influence reflected in the world's fascination with the church's pageantry and its traditions. The burial of the old pope, the eyes of the world were watching. The whole mysterious conclave process, people were absorbed by that. And, you even had gamblers, the odds makers betting on who the new pope would be. People were taking bets over this. And then, of course, you had all the suspense during the brief days of the conclave. It only took, I think, several days to choose the new pope, and 4 votes, 2 days, something like that. But you had the black smoke. But then finally, on the fourth vote, you had the white smoke pouring out of St. Peter's, and the suspense as the world was watching with bated breath to see who would emerge on the balcony. I was watching it live, just like everybody else. I was interested too, though for different reasons than Catholics, of course. But you had the vast international crowds there huddled at St. Peter's. And then finally, an American. Fascinating. An American. We'll talk about the implications of that in a future message. An American emerged. Robert Francis Prevost, Leo the 14th. The crowd shouting, Habemus Papam. Habemus Papam. We have a pope. This was very fascinating stuff. It's no wonder the eyes of the world were upon it. Very suspenseful. I mean, you can't create this kind of television. It's just very, indeed, it's very dramatic. And again, when we talk about Roman Catholicism, it's not just a matter of Rome's influence on the Church of Rome itself, and even upon secular society and world politics, but Rome has had an increased influence upon the thought of the evangelical world, even in recent years. You see, this is another issue that really provokes us to explore these topics. And, excuse me, it's a key matter of concern here. There's been a certain, shall I say, a certain trend that's been taking place over recent years, that we've seen a number of young, very bright, very thoughtful evangelicals gravitating towards the Church of Rome and ultimately renouncing the legacy of the Reformation and becoming Roman Catholics. And some of these have been significant evangelical thought leaders, young men who have departed from nominal adherence to Protestantism and have journeyed across the Tiber to become Roman Catholics, or some have journeyed to, shall we say, Constantinople or Byzantium and become Eastern Orthodox in their faith. Both of these churches, of course, are sacramental churches. Both of them have an ancient heritage. Both of them claim to be the apostolic church. Both of them claim to be the Catholic Church. It's not just the Church of Rome that claims to be the universal church. So does the Greek or Eastern Orthodox Church. It claims that it is the one true apostolic church, it being the church of the seven councils. In fact, if you ask Eastern Orthodox people, again, the faith of some 260 million people, what they think of Roman Catholicism, they will say the Roman Catholic Church is a schismatic group that broke off of us. They will say that the Roman Catholics were the first Protestants. I'm sure the Catholics do not appreciate that, but that is how the Eastern Orthodox Church sees it. And my point is, a lot of young people, young evangelicals, even significant evangelical thought leaders, have departed from the camp of at least nominal adherence to the principles of the Reformation and have gone the direction of these two sacramental churches that have a claimed historicity and universality attached to them. the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Let me give you some examples. A man named Francis Beckwith. 20 years ago, he was a very significant evangelical leader. In fact, he was elected president of the Evangelical Theological Society, which is a significant, I guess you would call it a think tank in the evangelical world. But a year after he was elected president of this representative Evangelical Theological Society, this kind of intellectual group of evangelicals, a year later he is inducted in 2007 into the Church of Rome. He apostatizes from Protestantism and becomes a Roman Catholic. That's Francis Beckwith. Perhaps even more shocking, Mark Galli, Galli. You may have heard that name, very popular evangelical author for many years. He was the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today for 7 years. Christianity Today, of course, a magazine that was founded years ago by Billy Graham and became kind of the flagship publication for evangelicalism. Of course, today it doesn't amount to anything. It's become so progressive. It represents the progressive wing of evangelicalism and them alone. But Mark Galli was indeed a thought leader, an opinion maker associated with the evangelical world, a very prominent individual, someone who was shaping the thought patterns of other evangelicals, writing all kind of opinionated articles. Of course, he was one of those who had a great hatred for President Trump, and made it like you're not a real evangelical if you support Trump. But Mark Galli was very outspoken, and he had a lot to say, claimed to be an evangelical leader. And then he retires from Christianity Today, and in 2020, he's inducted into the Catholic Church. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm shocked, shocked by that. I mean, it's like a lightning bolt. I mean, even though this guy was a progressive evangelical, still, this was an evangelical leader. That is stunning, that such a man would suddenly become a Roman Catholic. Renounce the entire movement of the Reformation. Renounce sola scriptura. Renounce justification by faith alone, by grace alone, through faith alone, in the shed blood alone, in the work of Christ alone, under the glory of God alone. So he has renounced the 5 solas of the Reformation. And again, I don't know how you feel about it. I'm stunned. But you have other bright young people, or I don't know, relatively young people, people like Cameron Bertuzzi. He's the spokesman for a very popular YouTube apologetics channel. Apologetics, of course, is the art of defending the Christian faith, putting together a solid argument for the Christian faith. This was entitled Capturing Christianity. Cameron has, again, apostatized from the faith of the Reformation and become a Roman Catholic. Joshua Charles, a well-known historian, a young man. He was even a White House speechwriter. He, like a well-known author, he likewise left behind his Protestant heritage and joined the Church of Rome in the year 2018. Scott Hahn, a former Presbyterian minister who is now a Roman Catholic apologist. He's very well known for having written the book Rome, Sweet Home. This is a tome that talks about his conversion to Roman Catholicism and the reasons that he gives for why he found peace within the Catholic Church. Another one, Tim Staples, a well-known Catholic apologist. He He appears on Catholic Answers. That's a significant Roman Catholic website that deals with defending the Catholic faith, an apologetic website. Again, apologetics has to deal with providing a reasoned defense for your beliefs. Excuse me. He went from Southern Baptist to Assembly of God and then ultimately migrated to Rome. We already mentioned Ross Douthat, well-known writer, also I believe he has an internet blog, well-known personality, but he too migrated from evangelicalism, in this case Pentecostalism, to Rome. Hank Hanegraaff. Now, this was the Bible answer man who succeeded Walter Martin, one of the great cult experts, was on the radio, a very well-known personality, a leader in evangelicalism. He converted to Eastern Orthodoxy in 2017. Of course, then you can go back further. Frankie Schaeffer, another conversion that shocked everybody. Frankie Schaeffer was the son of one of the great Christian men of the 20th century, Dr. Francis Schaeffer, and of course his wife, Edith Schaeffer, a well-known author. Dr. Schaeffer, a very thoughtful personality, a deep thinker. His books are excellent, but his son, Frankie, was a very outspoken conservative evangelical, wrote a number of books, produced, also he was interested in film. But Frankie Schaeffer, after his father's death, becomes Eastern Orthodox. Now he's apparently still Eastern Orthodox, but he's a very unusual member of that body. He now claims to be a Christian atheist, whatever that is. Frankie Schaeffer, a very stormy personality who never seems to be happy about anything. But nonetheless, this is another example of somebody who people look to as an evangelical leader who's now associated with one of these ancient sacramental churches that claims to be the one true church, the Catholic Church, in this case, Eastern Orthodoxy. And then you have Rod Dreher, last name I'll give, another thought leader who migrated from Protestantism to Rome and now Eastern Orthodoxy. He's made the full route. But Rod Dreher is a very well-known cultural critic and an analyst. These are all intelligent people, thoughtful people who have made this journey from Protestantism, historic Protestantism, over to either Catholicism or to Eastern Orthodoxy. There are many reasons for these conversions. Many turn away from the shallow and ungrounded neo-evangelicalism of their youth and of their younger days to Rome out of an earnest desire to become connected to Roman Catholicism's historic heritage. Some claim that Roman Catholicism offers kind of an intellectualism, a reflectiveness that evangelicalism does not. It offers a dignity of worship, a seriousness of worship, whereas many of our evangelical churches have become kind of carnivals and circuses. You hear this over and over again from a lot of thoughtful young people who abandon evangelicalism for Catholicism. There are others who claim that their conversion is rooted in the Catholic apologetic, that they were convinced by Rome's arguments. Jimmy Akin, who also works for Catholic Answers, we had already mentioned that organization in connection with Tim Staples. Jimmy Akin is like their senior apologist there, but he comes out of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and he says that he was drawn to Rome by his just by studying Matthew 16 and listening to the logic of the Roman Catholic argument, and he claims that that is the basis of his leap from conservative Presbyterianism to Catholicism. So there are many reasons behind these conversions. I also think that just general ignorance of the thought and heritage of what the Reformation really stands for, its doctrines, also have contributed mightily to this home to Rome phenomenon. I think there is a lack of understanding in terms of the biblical basis for why the reformers believed what they did and why they broke from the medieval church. But when you think about Roman these conversions to Roman Catholicism, I'm going to wrap up with J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is a very brilliant person. Politically speaking, I greatly appreciate him. I certainly would have no issue with him becoming the next president. He's a conservative populist, very thoughtful young man, and a very traditional young man. Certainly, I think he would make a good president, much better than Mike Pence, if I may say so, but that's my opinion. But J.D. Vance converted to Roman Catholicism in 2019, only 5 years ago, and he wrote a very long essay for a Roman Catholic journal that's entitled "In the Light." And this essay is over 6,000 words, actually closer to 7,000 words. And he talks about his journey when he was very young, being raised by a grandmother who was generally evangelical. She admired Billy Graham and so forth, but she was unchurched. She didn't trust the institutional church. J.D. was not taken to church as a child. Later on, when he reconnected to his father, he became very zealous in the Pentecostal church, his father's church, and was very regular in attendance. That was his evangelical phase. And then J.D. went through a period where he questioned Christianity altogether, what he calls his angry atheist phase. Ultimately, however, he came home to Rome in 2019. J.D. talks about the reasons here, and I think it's important to look at some of these reasons. And then I'm going to wrap up, since this video, I see the clock here on my computer, it's getting a little long. J.D. says the things that attracted him to Roman Catholicism were, first of all, its tradition and its history. He says that he talks about wanting to be part of a movement that has a deep, deep tradition. And he likes this idea of historic continuity. He was impressed by the idea that this church claims to be the original church going back to the apostles. And here's a couple quotes. He says, quote, "I really liked that the Catholic Church was just really old," unquote. Again, talking about wanting to be part of something historical. He was not finding that in Pentecostalism. And he says, quote, "I even began to acquire a sense that Catholicism possessed a historic continuity." Note that, a historic continuity with the church fathers, indeed with Christ himself, that the unchurched religion of my upbringing couldn't match, unquote. Again, this was the rootless kind of evangelicalism of his grandmother, the Pentecostal, evangelical Pentecostalism of his father. None of these things really could match, in his mind, the continuity that you find, historical continuity, the sense of gravitas that the Roman Catholic Church offered. Also, intellectually, he says that he got into St. Augustine, who was probably the greatest of the later church fathers. By the way, a very grace-oriented theologian. There's a lot in Augustine that's very non-Catholic, more like Calvinistic. But he advanced got into Augustine in terms of his confessions. And he says, quote, Augustine gave me a way to understand Christian faith in a strongly intellectual way. As someone who spent a lot of his life buying into the lie that you had to be stupid to be a Christian, Augustine really demonstrated in a moving way that that's not true, unquote. And he also says, quote, when I became more interested in faith, I started out with a clean slate and looked at the church that, listen, appealed most to me intellectually, unquote. Well, JD is an intellectual, a very brilliant young man, and in his mind, to put it bluntly, Roman Catholicism was the religion for smart people. Okay, he was impressed by its philosophical endeavors. You people like Thomas Aquinas and Augustine acknowledged great philosophers, and of course you have all this Jesuitic sophistry associated with Catholicism. This is the smart man's church. Evangelicalism is a faith for stupid people, okay, or more shallow kind of expression of Christianity. And he also was drawn to Rome, he says, because of its relative stability. Quote, I felt like the modern world was constantly in flux. The things you believed 10 years ago were no longer acceptable to believe 10 years later, unquote. So Roman Catholicism, he says, gave him a certain sense of stability. Here you have a movement that has taught what it's taught for hundreds of years, for centuries, even claiming to have taught these things for thousands of years. And Vance likes that as someone who wants to uphold tradition and cultural stability. We do have a culture, let's face it, that is chaos. And a lot of the evangelical world, sad to say, is in a state of chaos. We're not doctrinally sound in many of our evangelical churches, and we're going from one fad to another. J.D. was impressed that Roman Catholicism did not seem to be a party to that. It had a stability to it. Also, the matter of authority and certainty. He writes there, as Roman Catholics, acceptance of both scripture and traditional authority slowly appeared to me as wisdom, as I watched too many of my friends struggle with what a given passage of scripture could possibly mean, unquote. In other words, you have all this chaos in the Protestant world with this sola scriptura idea that the Bible alone is the authority, and everybody then can interpret the Bible as they would, and the result has been multi-denominational chaos, uncertainty. What is the Bible really saying? Well, I would simply say this in wrapping up. Again, the reasons that folks turn to Catholicism are quite varied, and everybody has their own story. JD has his, and some of these others I mentioned have theirs, and all their reasons are different, and yet you do see some common patterns. Ultimately, everybody is accountable for their own life choices and is responsible for making bad choices. But I will say this as I wrap up. It behooves us as evangelicals to recognize that there is this noticeable pattern that a testimony like J.D. Vance's points to that kind of serves to underline some of the inherent weaknesses within today's brand of, shall we say, theologically shallow, biblically inept, self-preoccupied, consumer-driven, shallow evangelicalism. You have an evangelicalism today that is frankly more concerned with entertaining the goats than starving the sheep. That's the problem with these seeker-sensitive neo-evangelical churches. We're trying to please unregenerates more than we are trying to please God and feed God's people. That's one of our big problems. And we have a neo-evangelical church that is shallow, market-oriented, and it's resulted in your big mega churches that are popular, but aren't feeding anybody. So what? They have a lot of people, but what are they doing? What is a church like Rick Warren's doing? People have left Rick Warren's church and said, I sat in that man's church for 10 years and never heard a really clear articulation of the saving gospel. This is America's pastor. He's typical of this trend. And we think that shallow is the way to go. We think that's what's popular. And it is popular with some, but there really are individuals today that want something more, something real, something substantial. And I think maybe that is a contributing factor to why we're losing so many serious-minded young men of promise, like J.D. Vance. But the tragedy is, men like J.D. will not find what they are seeking across the Tiber in Rome. Yes, Rome wraps itself up in kind of an intellectualism, but which is appealing. In the end, it's Jesuitic sophistry is a scholastic fraud. It's something that's designed to mask Rome's non-historical claims, its grotesque superstitions. This is a religion that worships relics, human body parts. It's sophistry, mass, it's heretical theology. And yes, its worship is serious and ornate when compared to a lot of the circuses that you see in our evangelical churches. But the problem is this worship is often directed towards false objects. Mary. Yes, they do worship Mary, and we'll talk about that. I know they claim it's only veneration, but it is worship. It is adoration. There's no way around that. The other such false objects of worship, the saints, ultimately the papacy, the whole system of Rome is designed to elevate the papacy. Relics, these grotesque objects. Every Catholic altar in the world, by the way, contains a relic. Did you know that? The worship of idols in violation of the second commandment, and ultimately the worship of the host. Supposedly that becomes the Lord Jesus Christ at the Mass. Friends, I understand the appeal of Roman Catholicism, but it is a cosmetic appeal. I understand the concerns that lead intelligent young people into Catholicism, but those concerns will not be answered by this false religious system. I do believe that we who have serious-minded fundamental churches have much to offer such earnest seekers like J.D. Vance. All right, I'm going to wrap up here because of the length of this. This was supposed to be an introductory message, and I haven't even finished the introduction. So next week, we'll take up some of the things that we weren't able to get to this week. Till then, friends, I'm glad to be back, glad to be with you. And once again, this is Pastor Terry Reese, and may the Lord be with you.